What I intended to do when I wrote this book, and I started in the late 90s, I'd actually been traveling in the US, and I was reading Campbell's book, The Mythic Dimension, which some of you might have seen, and in there he's got an essay, I think it's called The Mystery Number of the Goddess. It's either that or The Occult in Myth, Art and Literature. They're both similar essays, and they both are to do with mythic numerical patterns that are kind of woven through myths and seem to be, in some sense, inherent to the deep psyche. And I had all these ideas of a pattern pervading everything, and pattern as this organizing force that was evident in astrology, in the arrangement between the planets, evident in the depths of the psyche, and the arrangement between the archetypes in the psyche. So I wanted to write a book that applied astrology to the hero's journey. That was my my aim. I wanted to show how you could use astrology, like your own astrological birth chart, and an understanding of where the planets are now and how they relate to your birth chart. It's called transits. How you could use astrology to illuminate the hero's journey. It seemed to me that the hero's journey it's a universal model. It's a universal schema for psycho-spiritual growth, or the mystical journey, spiritual journey. And I felt that if you could bring in astrology, that would bring in an individual element. You would individualize that universal schema of the hero's journey. Like you could know, like, I've got these two planets are in alignment in my chart, or these other two planets are in alignment in the sky for the next 2 or 3 years, and they're really focused in on my chart. And if you knew that, you could use that as a kind of a way to figure out what are the major themes that are constellated in your own individual experience at any particular time. So, I mean, it's going to be hard for me to explain this well, but I didn't write that book. I didn't write that book because as soon as I got into writing about astrology, I was like, wow, it's going to make no sense to anyone. How can it be that a planet, 2 planets in the solar system can have any relationship to what is happening in the depths of our own inner life? I mean, it just seems crazy. I mean, I knew that I was convinced of the value of astrology because I've been doing it for years, but I knew that in terms of the culture's worldview, astrology is nonsense, and you can't explain it scientifically in terms of gravitational forces or electromagnetism or anything like that. There is just no valid explanation. I think it was Carl Sagan, the cosmologist, who said the gravitational force of the midwife is stronger than any force from any planet at the moment that the child is born. Gravity is negligible. So what I had to do in this book really is to try to present a new worldview, or a paradigm within which astrology could make more sense to people. And I thought, well, I just write a couple of chapters doing the philosophy of astrology, and then 2 chapters became 3, became 4, became 5, and then the whole book then is on an astrological worldview. And what I do in this book is I use the new paradigm sciences. So Fritjof Capra, I'm sure you've heard of him. He wrote the Tao of Physics in the early 70s, mid-70s. David Bohm was a contemporary of Einstein, worked with Einstein a little bit, a physicist. I use his ideas. Rupert Sheldrake is another well-known new paradigm thinker in biology. And Pierre Teilhard de Chardin wrote the famous book, The Phenomenon of Man, about the evolution of the cosmos. I was studying with Richard Tarnas, who is best known for archetypal astrology. His book, Cosmos and Psyche, came out in 2006. So I was studying with him, and I was studying with cosmologist Brian Swim. And so I had, on the one hand, these cosmology, and I exposed myself to the new sciences, and then on the other hand, I was getting Jung, myth, archetypal astrology. And so what I tried to do is to bring Jungian ideas together with the new sciences to show how it could be that the same kind of self-organizing dynamic was at work in the arrangement between the planets in space and in the arrangement of the archetypes in the depths of the psyche. So that's what I try to argue for in this book. So I'm yet to write the book on archetypal astrology and the hero's journey. That's a future project. But so what I mean, I can give a couple of examples that might help you understand this. So in astrology, each of there are eight planets and the sun and the moon, and they're all called planets in astrology. So there are 10 planets, and each planet is associated with a specific archetypal principle. So like the sun, as I said earlier, is to do with the light of consciousness, the ego, the center of consciousness. The hero archetype, the sun descends below the horizon, the hero descends into the underworld, is reborn, the sun is reborn each day, each night. So that's the sun. It's the I principle, the intentional yang type energy of the personality, the assertive, self-expressive aspect of the self. And then the moon is more like the yin, the feminine, the yielding, the receptive, the containing matrix of existence, the mother, to do with the mother and the child archetypes. So then Mercury is to do with the mind, the rational mind, and each of the planets have their own particular archetypal meaning. Venus, Aphrodite, love, beauty, romance. And then the slower moving planets, particularly Saturn, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, they seem to be really to do with like profound psychological and cultural transformation. So Pluto is connected to the archetype of rebirth. It's to do with instinct, empowerment, power drives, elemental power of nature, Shiva-like creative, destructive power, the underworld, the mythic underworld, the whole death rebirth process that I've just been talking about. And Neptune is to do with the divine, spirit, enchantment, magic, mystery, image, myth, dream, the whole collective unconscious in Jungian terms. So that's, like the kind of a spiritual planet, and Pluto is this dark underworld, transformative, the force of nature, to do with the force of nature, the power of nature. And then Uranus is to do with like awakening and freedom and liberation and revolution and rebellion. And in our own time, since 2007, the whole world has been living under an alignment, a major alignment between Uranus and Pluto. They're 90 degrees apart in the sky. Okay, so what you get is Uranus to do with rebellion, revolution, the new, creative change, disruption, trickster, is empowered by Pluto. I said Pluto is to do with power, elemental force, and so you get, when you see Uranus and Pluto together in the sky, you get periods of revolutionary tumult and turbulence, like the 1960s, or Uranus and Pluto were together in the same position in the sky. French Revolution, Uranus and Pluto were exactly opposite in the sky, 1789. They were in major alignment again in 1848, and a wave of revolutions across Europe. And then, lo and behold, in our own time, Uranus and Pluto are 90 degrees apart, and we get the Arab Spring and the whole revolutions in the Middle East, and the protests against the financial crisis in Greece. And just today, you probably saw the Ukraine protests, massive protests in Ukraine. They pulled down a statue of Stalin. It's just like this revolutionary fervor is just engulfing the world, and that reflects, from an astrological view, Pluto and Uranus coming together, the archetypes with those two planets coming together. And it's often a time of like technological empowerment, the space age in the 60s. And again, we see in our own time, suddenly China and India launch space missions. They want to get to Mars now. And, it's like whenever you get Uranus and Pluto together, there's a technological empowerment. Uranus is the new, the technological, the breakthrough. And Pluto's the power, the power of the atomic explosion. Pluto was discovered 1931, and I think the nucleus of the atom was split in 1930, or might be the other way around. Pluto is that kind of nuclear, titanic energy. That is how Pluto manifests. So what you can do, if you know a little bit of astrology, is to look at your chart, see what's happening at any time, and say, oh, wait a minute, I've got Pluto is aligned with Saturn in my chart for 3 years, 4 years, and those two principles together, they often correlate with death rebirth processes or intense crises. Saturn is the archetype of the old, like death, crystallization, the problematic side of life, suffering, mortality, constriction, blocks, the no response, negation. It has a bad press in astrology, and you can see why. It's Saturn. People generally don't experience Saturn very favourably, but it's also to do with qualities like maturation, gravitas, and structure, and containment, positive qualities as well as these negative ones. So if you know that you've got Pluto aligned with Saturn in your chart for 3 or 4 years, you can expect experiences like extreme feeling very constricted, or feeling like your old self is dying, or feeling like everything secure in your life is being somehow destroyed and things are being rebuilt and reforged on a deep level. And if you know that, that's valuable information to think, because what might seem to be a traumatic and an extremely confusing, troubling experience, if you can look and see, what you actually, Pluto Saturn in my chart, and know what that means, it gives like a cosmological context, a framework that can help you render what is happening more conscious. You can become more conscious of the transformative process that is taking place within you. And it just gives meaning, it gives deep life meaning, so that even though the suffering might not be diminished if you're going through a death rebirth process or an existential crisis, the suffering is going to be the same, but if you can bear the suffering meaningfully, then that can totally transform it. Was it Jung said that meaning makes a great many things bearable, perhaps everything. And I think that's true. And someone like Viktor Frankl, logotherapy, he had a similar emphasis on meaning. He survived concentration camp, and it was just came out convinced that that if you could find meaning in your existence, you can survive anything. And I think that is what both the hero's journey model and archetypal astrology can give you. So you can use astrology to illuminate different periods of your life, and you can go back through your life and you can say, what was happening when I was 25, why did I feel like that then? And it can be quite a revelation to study the astrology, what was happening there. I don't believe that astrology can be used for prediction. If you read the sun sign stuff, it's kind of superficial. And a lot of astrology is still very literally predictive. This is going to happen to you in 2 years' time, this is going to happen in 3 years' time. Very precise. I don't use astrology that way. And archetypal astrology is to do with understanding these deep underlying themes that are constellated in life at any time. And how you experience Pluto Saturn might be very different from the next person. One person might be, I don't know, I've done readings with people, someone was carrying twins, was pregnant with twins, and the whole heavy burden of carrying that and then raising 2 children, that fits Pluto Saturn. Or someone like Al Gore, who confronts the environmental crisis and takes that on as a huge burden. He's got a Pluto Saturn in his chart. Jung had Pluto Saturn, the whole focus on Herculean strength, surviving the death rebirth process. Nietzsche, another Pluto Saturn person, or Aurobindo, the Hindu philosopher. People with Pluto Saturn in their chart generally are focused on intense struggle. There's a certain weightiness to their experience, and often a compression and a constriction. But it can come through in a wide variety of ways. I'm thinking like Nick Drake, the 60s musician, he had Pluto Saturn. And I think for someone like that, it was almost pulled him to suicide. It was a very dark, kind of overwhelming complex in his life. And yeah, I mean, it can come through that way.